Welcome. My name is Gopal Sundur, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Thank you for joining us on this ICG Global Thought Leader webinar series. Today, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Stewart Desson, our newest Global Thought Leader. Stewart is amongst the most influential thinkers in the world when it comes to psychometric analysis and assessments and organizational development. Today, he'll show you how you can apply his cutting-edge thinking that'll help your clients humanize their organization and to make individuals understand themselves better. So, welcome, Stewart.
Thank you for your kind words, Gopal. Much appreciated and delighted to be on the webinar here today.
Great. So here's how we're going to get you guys interested and invested. Now, today's session, I must say, is going to be a wee bit technical, and we will be covering a lot of ground on the topic of psychometric assessments. So my suggestion is sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation with Stewart. The agenda is going to be structured along the following lines. Many of you have seen something similar, but today we have two different things. One is, if you look at item number 2, we'll be playing 2 short videos, and then towards the later part of the webinar, you will also have Stewart demonstrating some of his IP in real time. So I will lead the discussion with Stewart through a series of questions, and at the end of it, there'll be enough time for you to ask questions. And you can pose questions either orally when I unmute you, or you can use the tab that's down there which says questions, and then you can write your questions and I will pose them to Stewart. So during the duration of this interview, your microphones, the attendee microphones, will be muted. So now back to you, Stewart. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your passion for the subject of psychometric assessments?
So thanks, Gopal. So yeah, my name is Stewart Desson. I'm the CEO and founder of Lumina Learning, a business that's been going for just over 7 years, which sets out to be a leading-edge psychometric organization that's in the digital era. So digital psychometrics for a digital era. In terms of my background, it's been something of a journey to get to the point of creating these resources, which I'm going to be really excited to share in a couple of the key models with you here today. If I go back in time, I started out doing something called operational research when I had a full head of hair at the time, way back in the 80s, which is like mathematical modeling, stats, and IT, and had a first career in that, and then transitioned from that into general management with British Airways, and moved then eventually into being a leadership development coach and facilitator and change manager before having used lots of psychometrics in the market, seeing that there was what I believe was a huge gap for a more humanistic psychometric that doesn't put people in a box, doesn't label people, but actually embraces the complexity of the individual and is a sort of a catalyst for people to explore themselves and develop as a leader. So a different approach to psychometrics, which caused me to want to undertake a PhD in this area and do battle with some of the more traditional approach to building psychometrics to find an approach that doesn't reduce you to a number or a label, but is still a psychometric approach, but one that frees you up to have great conversations about how you can develop yourself. So that's the journey that I've been on. I'm hoping that makes sense, Gopal.
Absolutely, Stewart. You know, Stewart, most of us have, at some time or the other, have had individual assessments, sometimes in the form of personality assessments, and other times in the form of performance assessments. In general, psychometric assessments have been around for several decades, as you know. And they come in various name tags. You call them Briggs-Myers or Big Five or 360 degree or whatever. But with your research and thought leadership, you have taken psychometric assessments to a whole new level of sophistication. Could you tell us a little bit about what the big idea behind this is in your thinking on this topic?
Well, the big idea is when we measure people psychometrically, we want to do that for a purpose. We're not doing it just to quantify things. We're doing it because we want to be a catalyst to raise people's awareness as to who they are. We're doing it because we want people to not only know who they are, but be able to read other people and to give them a language, a psychometric language, for looking at the behavior of others. And if we can do that, then we're in with a chance that people can value different ways of being. So, for example, I'm a fairly inspired, energized person and a little bit of a rule breaker, but can I value my finance director, who would never break a rule, is unbelievably structured, and thankfully doesn't do creative accounting? Can I value people who are different? Well, I need to understand that our psychologies are different and we both need to value each other. If we can do that, the big idea is that we can co-create together and harness the diversity in our strengths and our way of being, get better results as a team, and I can get better results as a leader. I'll have more engaged staff if I can read people accurately, understand who I am, who they are, and connect with them more effectively. So in practical terms, that's the big idea: better connection and more engagement to a more realistic understanding of who I am without reducing me or anyone else to a type or a box. Yeah?
Great.
So critical to this approach is that we take a look at some of the unconscious assumptions in psychometrics. So one assumption is that leaders need to be extroverted. That's been around, that assumption, for 100 years. Not so. We can lead from an introverted space. Another assumption is that leaders need to be tough and strong. It's certainly helpful, but it can also be helpful to be compassionate and a team player and so on. But maybe we could be both. Is it possible to be tough and compassionate and, you know, integrating those opposites? Is it possible to be introverted and extroverted? With my extroversion, I can sell to people and talk and persuade. I'm using my extroversion here on the call today, but with my introversion, I can listen and hear people out and be more contained and create a different space. And the truth is, good leaders need to do both. So I would say that's the big idea.
Great. I know we have a video behind us. Would you like me to play that? I must.
Yeah, why not? Let's play the video. Let's have a little animation that should bring to life what I've just said. Hopefully.
I must warn the audience that GoToWebinar is not particularly suited for video streaming. So, in case you find a little bit of jerkiness, that's on account of the GoToWebinar software. Anyway, here goes.
According to Lumina Learning, consistently applying the following 4 principles will help organizations see people, their most valuable natural resource, not as human doings, but as human beings. The 4 principles are developing self-knowledge, building rapport, valuing diversity, and co-creating results. 4 powerful principles that transform performance. Let's look at each in turn.
Firstly, developing self-knowledge. Lumina Spark helps build self-knowledge through exploring the distinction between 1, our natural psychological preferences, 2, how we adjust to meet the needs of key relationships and tasks in our everyday environment, and 3, how we may react under pressure. We call these your 3 personas: your underlying persona, your everyday persona, and your overextended persona. Shining the light of awareness on these 3 personas is an important way to work with this first principle of developing self-knowledge.
The second principle is building rapport, but a prerequisite to building rapport is the ability to speed read others. This is the ability to quickly assess another's behavioural qualities and understand where they are coming from. Lumina Spark provides an easy-to-use framework for reading your own personal psychology and that of others. The ability to speed read others is one of the most practical life skills any individual functioning in an organisation can develop. We make use of the ability to speed read others in order to better connect with others and build rapport. Building rapport involves communicating with others in a way that meets their communication needs and makes them much more likely to hear what we have to say.
The third principle is valuing diversity. Once we know ourselves and can speed read others and therefore build better rapport, we're ready to value psychological diversity. We'll know how to better communicate with others who have quite opposite approaches to our own. And we can avoid the risk of recruiting in our own image or only valuing others who have similar ways of functioning. Being able to truly value diversity strengthens our relationships and our teamwork, and it also helps us appreciate the diversity within our own personality.
We are now ready to move to the fourth principle, where we co-create results by adopting a fundamentally collaborative and win-win approach that naturally embraces the first three principles. If we try to bypass the other three principles and go just for the results, we may deliver, but the results either won't last or we won't take our performance to the highest levels. People that can master these principles become truly transformational leaders, capable of taking those they work with to higher levels of performance.
Making these principles come alive is a benefit Lumina Learning's innovative products and inspirational consultants bring to organisations. They can make all the difference in helping organisations see people, their most valuable natural resource, not as human doings, but as human beings.
Great. All right. Stewart, most of us have at some time of the, as you know, even though many of us have already gone through individual assessments and so on, like I mentioned before, this whole area is in the realm of psychology, and many of us don't quite latch on to the definitions and terminologies that exist within that. So it would be of great help to the audience if you could explain the different definitions and how your approach is distinct and different from other approaches.
Okay, so thanks for that, Gopal. So hopefully the short animation there made the key point about having that self-knowledge, which is linked here to understanding our personality using the latest techniques from psychology. So if we have a look at this table here, we can see that we've got on the left-hand side the Jungian dimensions. Those of you familiar with Myers-Briggs or the Jung type indicator or the cursor sorter and so on. This is what was measured going back to the 1920s when Jung coined a number of the phrases, introversion, extroversion, thinking, feeling, and so on. Now, interestingly, in the 50s and the 60s, the Big Five as an approach became popular, a completely different methodology. As opposed to Jung creating an elegant theory based on observing people, mainly lunatics actually somewhere in Switzerland and Germany, the Big Five, by contrast, was based on a huge empirical analysis, finding which questions correlate with other questions, and they found that, for example, people that are imaginative tend to be quite pushy with their ideas and tend to be quite conceptual. They clustered them together and called it open to experience. So if you look down the Big Five column, the OCEAN acronym is from the industry. The key thing that's emerged from literally tens of thousands of researchers over the last 40 years who've clustered the data together and found these are the dominant 5 factors in personality. And as it turns out, 4 of them link quite nicely to the dimensions that Jung came up with in the 20s with his elegant theory. Of course, the Big Five people argue that their result is more robust because it's empirically derived based on survey data. If you look at the right-hand column, you'll see how we've innovated with Lumina Spark, because instead of just measuring extroversion, we measure extroversion and introversion. Typically with the Big Five, you get 1 score. You're 80% extroverted, that makes you 20% introverted. But with Spark, it's possible to be 80% extroverted and 60% introverted. And we look at both ends and we sort of balance it. So if we go through the big five, being agreeable and being a nice person and schmoozing, well, actually, it's also beneficial to be outcome focused as well as people focused. With open to experience, if you're not open to experience with the big five, well, you'd be sort of a bit closed. But actually saying that you are down to earth and grounded and practical is a much nicer way of framing it, a more positive way of framing it. And conscientiousness, well, we call that discipline driven. But what's the benefit of being low on discipline? So I myself am low on discipline, and for 20 years in my career, psychometrics judged me negatively as a bit random and not consistent enough. But when we look at the benefits of that and find out that I'm inspiration driven, I seize the moment, I'll flex the rules to get a result, we find that's a positive thing. And so I'm hoping that gives you the gist of the dimensions that we're measuring here. I mean, the final one, neuroticism, typically it's been viewed in the literature that neuroticism is all bad and that we need to be emotionally stable. But we found actually that there can be some benefit to being highly emotional, and there can be some downsides to being too emotionally stable. So we're looking at removing some of the biases. So what I'm about to share with you is an evolution of the big five to bring it into the modern world, whereby both ends of the spectrum have a benefit. Of course, both ends have a downside as well. Does that help, Gopal?
Yes. I know that now that we have some of this definition in place, you also have a video that sort of drives home the point in the context of luminous.
Great, okay, let's have a video.
Great, another video. Here we go. Oh, sorry.
Hello, my name is Stewart, Desson. I'm the CEO of Lumina Learning. I'm also the author of the revolutionary new Lumina Spark psychometric model. I'd like to talk about that model and give you 3 reasons why it's better than all of the competition. The first is, gone are the days of typing people, of boxing them, of labeling them. With Lumina Spark, we embrace the paradox of who the individual really is. We measure them as they actually are. Individuals can have seemingly conflicting and opposite qualities. Here's an example. Here's someone who's a big picture thinker. They're visionary, they see possibilities, they're creative, but they're also down to earth, they're practical, they're detailed, and they execute. Leaders today need to embrace paradox, and we need to be able to measure that accurately. Secondly, Lumina Spark looks at your underlying everyday and overextended personas. Your underlying persona is your psychological preference. Your everyday is how you actually behave, and your overextended persona is how you respond to pressure or when you do too much of a good thing. This is accurately modeled within one colourful instrument, allowing you to contrast these 3 different personas measured directly. Thirdly, with Lumina Spark, we customize. We allow you to take your unique organisational needs, your unique objectives, and with our online resources, blend and adjust everything so it directly meets your organisational objectives. I hope you found those 3 things interesting. If you do want to know more, there's lots of information on our website, including details of our partners across the globe who can put you in touch with the most relevant local practitioner in your market. Thank you for your time.
Great. So hopefully that gives you the gist of the model, measuring the 3 personas at both ends. This is it displayed on a colourful mandala. If we just click through it, we've got the Lumina Spark terminology here. In the top right, I can be a big picture thinker, which links to open to experiencing the big 5, the opposite down to earth. At 6 o'clock in the model, I can be discipline driven, which in the literature is called conscientious. If I'm extroverted, well, I'm extroverted, the opposite introverted. And if you look at the top left, agreeableness in the literature we call people-focused, and the opposite would be outcome-focused. And for those of you familiar with the Jungian terminology, we've got the thinking, feeling, links to outcome-focused, people-focused, intuition, sensing, links to big picture thinking, down to earth. The judging, perceiving is discipline-driven, inspiration-driven, and of course, introversion, extroversion is in fact the same. So this is the gist of the model laid out in a circle. We've laid it out in a circle because the things that are next to each other, statistically, they correlate, they go together. For example, if you're discipline-driven at 6 o'clock, you're more likely to also be down to earth. So discipline means having a plan, being focused, sticking to it, ticking things off. Down to earth means being practical, factual, and cautious. They don't have to go together. It's possible to be disciplined and not down to earth. Some people are, but more often than not, they tend to go together. So we've linked them together and shaded them both blue. And you can see the full spectrum of the rainbow colours here as we go around the model. So if we flick to the next slide, you'll see jumping straight to a practical example. How do we use this? So there in the middle you've got the colourful splash. So the idea here is that it's like some paint's been thrown at the screen and it gives you a more organic reading on who you are. On the right hand side of the screen we've measured 24 qualities in your personality. The top right, this person takes charge, they're not so tough, they're competitive and logical, but they're not that purposeful. On the left-hand side of the screen, the bottom left, you see, well, how do these personality traits, how do they impact your competence at work? And in this example, we've got 16 typical competencies that a leader would need to display, and we can look at the potential the leader has in these competencies based on the measurement of who they are in their personality. So, of course, this is useful for looking at potential recruitment and fit in a role. It's also useful for thinking, well, how do I need to develop? You know, should I build on my strengths? Maybe it's good to build on my strengths and build a competence where I've got a natural head start. Or do I need to cover some of my weaknesses and maybe recruit around me to cover some of the things that I'm really not that suited to do, and it's always going to be difficult for me? This is a nice simple one-page report that's often used. There are much more comprehensive reports too. If we flick to the next slide, a couple of bits to summarize it. We're obviously measuring traits, not types, and I'm going to share some research with you now. So this part of the talk, I am going to go a little bit numbers orientated on you for the next 15 minutes before finishing with something more interactive to bring it to life from a personal point of view. So we've got a 4 and 5 factor version. I'm going to show you a factor analysis. We're looking at these three personas.
For the benefit of the audience, I just want to relate that the following slides would be around the topics of reliability, validity, and other quality indicators that help employers who are making choices on what kind of assessment tools to pick. They would be looking at those kind of factors: reliability, validity, and other quality indicators. And what you will see from what Stewart is going to tell you is how this particular thing is different and supports those requirements.
So thank you for that, Gopal. So it's, as you say, yes, I'm going to outline something around the reliability, the validity, and the science behind it. Yeah?
Would you like me to click through this?
Yeah, please do. Please click through. So typically when you use the big 5, you would measure the things on the left and not measure the things on the right. That's the traditional approach. So you would measure extroversion, not introversion. You'd measure open to experience, big picture thinking, not down to earth. But we've found to really accurately recruit someone, it's helpful to measure both sides, partly because people can be opposites. We don't want to oversimplify people and put them in a box. Hence the video with the exploding box a little bit earlier. We don't want to box people. We want to allow you to have that paradox within you. Many of you on the call today will have opposites going on. So if we move to the next slide, you've got the Jungian overlay there, and if we flick on again, you'll see for the research I'm about to share with you, we're saying, can we measure both poles of the Big Five? So I've been working on this for 7 years to prove statistically that this approach is valid. And can we take into account what's called valence and descriptive content? So when you measure something like introversion, extroversion, there's a tendency for people that are more positive to want to identify with being extroverted, and for people who are not as positive to identify being with introverted. But that's not the definition of introversion, extroversion. That's a definition of valence and how we relate to our emotions. So can we separate out you know, our esteem and our positivity from the things that we're actually measuring? So if we flick through now to the next slide, a few empirical objectives to test whether, when we do measure at both ends, we've still got the Big Five at work, to see whether we can reduce the 5 factors to 2, so we can put it on a piece of paper in 2 dimensions. The downside of 5 dimensions is it's hard to get your mind around. So we want to see whether a factor analysis at the 2-factor level supports the structure, the layout in the circular model. And if we keep flicking through, we can rejig these different personality aspects according to how they correlate. So we know that people that are inspiration driven are more likely to be big picture thinking. People big picture thinking are more likely to be extroverted. People that are extroverted more likely to be outcome focused, and so on. And if we flick one further, that's in the literature in a sort of a 2-factor model of personality. This is often called by Digman and de Jong beta plasticity. The stuff on the right, being disciplined and introverted and so on, that's sometimes called alpha and stability. And the latest neuroscience suggests that these 2 different personality modes actually link to brain chemistry. So there's a biological origin to these personality differences. It's not just our upbringing or our it is our part. It's not just our upbringing; it's also our genetics. So if we flick through to the next slide, we're going to now sort of recap the model that we're looking at and say, well, can we justify this particular layout? This is a hypothesized circumplex. We're saying they fit together in this way, but does the data empirically support that when we do a factor analysis at the 2 level? So if we carry on flicking through, firstly we'll see we're going to do a principal component analysis. So this is based on 2,506 people who filled in the Lumina Spark questionnaire, a simple Likert scale, and it's 32 subscales underneath these aspects that you've seen on the mandalas. There's lots of subqualities, and if we flick through again, we're going to rotate it, and now we'll see some of the results. So in terms of how much variance do we explain in this model, we have got a 5-factor model validating the 5-factor theory, and we've explained a decent amount of variance in the data through the 5 factors, 34%, component 1, and so on. If we lay this out, we can sort of say, well, does it link to what other people have said in the industry, such as the Costa McCree that created the NEO? And indeed, you know, there's neuroticism, the first factor. The second one's extroversion. We keep flicking through, and then we'll get discipline-driven, and the next one is being people-focused, outcome-focused, and then the big picture thinking down to earth. And if we keep going, this is what it looks like, the output from a factor analysis. So on the vertical, you've got how the questions cluster. So if we take an example, if we look at the introverted and extroverted row in the middle, if we get all our introverted questions, add them all up, and all our extroverted questions and add them all up, and do the factor analysis, we find that they load onto factor 3, but introversion positively and extroversion negatively. And those introverted questions, they only load on the 3rd factor. They don't load on agreeableness or conscientiousness. This tells us that we've got what's called simple structure, which means that, yes, the questions that measure introversion, they basically do measure introversion, and they're not polluted by measuring other things. And any psychometric, you want to have a nice simple structure. We do have down to earth that's in open to experience, also linking to introversion. A little bit of a cross-loading on one particular set of questions. If we flick to the next page, It's the exact same analysis, 5 factors, but broken down at the lower level of qualities. Again, we've got simple structure, and we can see caution, now evidence-based, sneaking in on to a different factor. If we click again, what we're going to do now is say, well, what about a 4-factor version if we take out neuroticism? Because often in the workplace, we don't want to, when we run interventions, talk about anger and hostility. That's not always appropriate for initial intervention. So a 4-factor version gives pretty much the same result. Yeah. So clicking through, now let's try and take this and turn it just into 2 dimensions. We want to do this because we want to put it on one piece of paper to help people get their heads around it. And if we flick through and do a factor analysis, and this is the data, so there you have it. There's the 8 aspects, how they load on the 2 factors. It comes to life though when you graph it on 2 dimensions, so you can see visually that what we have is a circular model. So there's the circular model with the items, for example, that measure people-focused, loading negatively on component 1, and the ones that measure outcome-focused at the top, loading positively on component 1, and so on. But not component. And if we blow that up to make it clearer to see, you can see that this factor analysis is explaining and justifying a really nice circular layout of a personality model. There's people-focused, inspiration-driven, big-picture thinking, extroversion goes in there, outcome-focused, then discipline-driven, down-to-earth, and introverted. In other words, this is the structure of personality revealed, but put in a nice user-friendly form in a colourful model, but not just made up randomly, but driven by the data. If we keep flicking through, we'll again see a reaffirmation of the model in a circular format that's justified by the data. And if we keep going, what we'll see now is a validation study. So so far it's the internal structure of the model, and we've seen that it does have 5 factors, it does beautifully lay out in a circle. This is now taking 200 and odd people and getting them to fill in this questionnaire, assessing their personality, but then saying, how does this link to their personality, and how does it link in fact to their competence at work? So we got staff and peers to give feedback, and I'm just going to show you 3 cool slides here. So on the vertical, you've got different measures of personality. There's the same big 5 that you'll see, openness at the top, and then flicking through to discipline-driven, extroversion, agreeableness, and then something on in this version, there's a lot more measured on neuroticism. And the correlations are shown here, and the ones in bold are the biggest ones. Now this is all based on your dispositional instinctive traits. Across the horizontal, we've got 8 key competencies from a model called the Great 8 that's been validated by Professor Bartram, and we're correlating our personality on the left, on the vertical, with what other people think of our competence at work on the horizontal. And we've done this in the context of our underlying persona, who we are underneath. And what we find is there aren't that many strong correlations. So in this study, what correlates with good performance at work for these professional people is being a little bit self-controlled. That helps. Being, in this case, introversion's coming out. Being calm and introverted is helping. And down the bottom, having an inner confidence. These are the things that instinctively inside help our performance at work. Were you going to say something, Gopal?
No, go ahead.
Okay, great. If we flick to the next slide, it's the exact same matrix, but this time what we've measured is the person's actual behavior at work, and we've asked staff and peers to say, how does their behavior in terms of the big 5 impact their competence? Now we're finding some much higher correlations here, and including some negative ones. So if we look down here, we can see that being achievement orientated and disciplined supports our ability to create concepts and to drive performance. Again, we're finding introversion is helping to an extent. Now we're getting in here that being autonomous and understanding others, seeming opposites, help our performance pretty much across the board. So understanding others helps us respect people and relate to people, whereas being autonomous helps us deliver results and get stuff done. And we need to do these seemingly opposite things if we're going to be effective as professionals. And then down the bottom you can see being upbeat starts to become pretty important, and being composed under pressure. And we can see some negative correlations with, for example, being fiery, so being quite impassioned. That doesn't always help in the eyes of staff and our colleagues. Now we're going to flick. The final page here is going to look at our overextended persona. This is how we behave under pressure. What do we do under pressure? And we start to see some interesting negative correlations. So if we want to really, let's view this as what will kill our performance, what will damage staff engagement. Well, if we start and work down it here, you can see being a bit hasty, the fourth row down, that's not good for our performance. Being excitable, our overplayed extroversion, getting too excited, that's not good for performance. And being too critical of others is a killer in terms of relating to people and respecting people, and therefore getting results. But lots of negative correlations around pessimism's not good. The biggest killer here is being volatile. If we're too volatile and get mad with people, we're not going to get good feedback as to our professional performance. That's pretty interesting data, because also some of these things correlate with the traits of leaders. So often you do find leaders can be a bit fiery, a bit critical, a bit excitable, and make hasty decisions, certainly in certain industries. But this data is suggesting that when they're put under pressure, those are the very things that will disengage staff, which is why we need to explore this and help leaders fully understand it. So I hope you find that sort of evidence-based approach to looking at the link between who we are and our performance at work. I hope you found that that interesting. So
Absolutely.
if we flick on a bit further.
I think, it gives a lot of motivation for our consultants to be able to go out and speak to, the HR folks and the organizational development folks from these fantastically successful organizations.
Yes. Well, here's just an example of some of the clients that have used this intellectual property and integrated it into their organization. And it really is just a subset. There's a huge number of organizations work with globally, and all these resources are translated into Dutch, German, Spanish, Portuguese, Japanese, Chinese, and so on. And we do find that the model holds up and the correlation holds up across the different cultures. Of course, you will find in Japan and China, being inspired and spontaneous is less valued, that culturally people need to be more controlled. So some of the numbers vary culturally, but the basic Big Five structure shines through because it's part of the human condition that's evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. So any large multinational will seek to get benefit from this. If we flick on through a bit further, what I'm going to do now for the remaining 20 minutes is give you a bit of an interactive demo, and this is where I'm going to ask some of you if you're interested to partake, and for me to figure out on the fly something about your personality. We're going to do a bit of sharing to compare. So Gopal, could I suggest that you hand over the screen to myself so that I can share the app here, and I'll see if anyone on the call wants their personality analysed. Yeah.
You have the screen.
I've got the screen. Okay, so share a screen. Let's see. Okay, so if you tell me, can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm going to flick in to. I'm going to flick into. Wait for it. I'm going to go into an app. Yeah. And this app here is going to allow me. Can you see it, Gopal? Is that working? Yep.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so we have a splash here, and I'm going to see, would anyone on the call here today like to go through for 2 or 3 minutes and have your personality analysed? If there is, Gopal, you could just unmute them so that they can chip in.
Okay, let me take David. And maybe Les. So I have Les, Hines, and David both unmuted.
So is this, am I speaking to David?
Good evening, morning, Stuart. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, very well. Thank you. Perfectly.
Great, great. Okay, so David, I'm going to ask you a few questions, and if you can see the screen. Firstly, I want to know how extroverted you are. If you think that you are very sociable and chatty and persuasive, and you like to take charge, it'll be nice and high. If you think you're not so chatty and persuasive, I'm going to make it lower. Where do you think it would be? We're going to do this pretty quickly for a demo. Is it 100, 75, 50? Where would you like it to be?
I'm not especially extroverted. I'd say about 40 extroverted.
About 40. So we'll go for about 40. Yep. Okay. And now we'll have a look at your introversion. So are you measured and more professional and serious? Are you contained? Do you listen first before you speak? Do you notice your thoughts and choose your words carefully? If so, you'd be pretty high. Or would your introversion be low? It's possible you could be low on both, or high on one, low on the other. Where would you be for your introversion?
More introverted, so I'd say around 70 or 80.
Go for about 70 or 80. And they don't have to add up to 100, but we'll go for a mid-range 75. Okay, let's have a look now at the bottom here, discipline-driven. So this would be, are you focused and purposeful? Do you like to be clear on your objectives? Do you like to have a plan, tick off the plan, hold people accountable? Do you want to be reliable and know if you give your word it will be done on time? That would be really high. Or would your discipline be mid-range or lower? But maybe before you answer, the opposite is being all inspired. So do you seize the moment? Are you inspiration driven? Do you like to do things in the spur of the moment? Do you like to, if necessary, break the rules, work around the bureaucracy to get a result, and so on? What do you reckon?
So I'm very conscientious. I always do what I say I will do. So quite high on that one. But I also like to be inspirational and very flexible and agile. So in this particular,
so you're doing a bit of both. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so just one sec. I go back in. So I'm going to make you pretty disciplined if I extend that down here. So how high would you be on the conscientious? Is it up in the 90s or?
Yeah, I'd say 80, something like that.
We'll go for a nice healthy 80. Yeah. Okay. And how high do you want to be on the inspiration-driven, seizing the moment and breaking the rules?
Probably a little less, maybe 60.
We'll go for it. We'll go for somewhere on that. Okay, great. Let's have a look now at your big picture thinking. Your big picture thinking is, are you a visionary? Are you full of good ideas? Do you like concepts? Are you radical? Do you want to push the boundaries and shake things up? Yeah. If so, you're a big picture thinker. And before you answer, are you down to earth? Is the opposite? Sorry, I got the wrong one there. Are you cautious and sensible and want the facts before you make any decision before you jump? Or are you both?
So I think probably 90 on the first, and relatively low, maybe a 30 on the second.
And maybe a 30 on the second. Okay, I'll rein that in a little bit. Okay, and then finally we're going to go for people-focused, outcome-focused. So your outcome-focused, this is where you're candid, tell the truth, even if it upsets people, get to the point, argue your case, bit of a competitive streak. That's outcome-focused. People-focused on the other side, being a nice guy, schmoozing, accommodating, avoiding conflict, trusting people, a bit of empathy for others. You sort of deeply care, but you may not always completely speak your mind.
So I would say 80 on the first and 50 on the second.
I'll go for 50 on the second. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. And we'll go more for like 80, about 80 on
outcomes.
On outcomes. Yeah. Okay, great. So we've instantly created a splash, and there you have it. And we can see we've got a nice gallery here. Now, I have prepared one earlier, Blue Peter style. So you can see you're the top left there, but we've got Gopal, who we did one for yesterday. So if I click to compare you, I'll click on Gopal, and then I'll click on you, David, and I'll click compare, and we're going to have a look and see how might you get on. What are your strengths? So Gopal, you're in red shaded, David, you're multicolored. So if we have a look at the text here, one of the most effective ways for Gopal and David to strengthen rapport is to be through innovative topics of conversation. So it's picked up on, that's what you have in common. You like open and unbounded discussions. We have a look here. That's because both of you are big picture thinking. Yeah? So if I click on big picture thinking here, and we have a look, you're happy when connecting at a creative level. If I flick through to the next one, though, you can express yourselves openly in terms of opinions and emotions. Let's go through and have a look at your outcome. You're both comfortable dealing with conflict. You can both be direct, and you're both pretty good at organising stuff. Actually, you've got a number of similarities. Neither of you are really that grounded. Neither of you are hugely practical, but you like a bit of rapport and so on. But David, you're a bit more comfortable making compromises in relationships to keep relationships stay intact. Yeah, you get the idea here that we can do some interesting comparisons. Yeah, and we can drill into your scores individually, and so we could go, David, and just look at yours full on here, and explore it if we wanted to have a look at your extroversion. And flick through and so on. So you can do it individually or collectively. That's sort of the gist of it. And we can build up a nice gallery. Now this is the interactive tool. It's cool for coaching. It's cool for meeting people one-to-one. You can build up a gallery of all sorts of cool and interesting people to work if you're working at a team level. Now. We've done a quick one on the fly, and David, thank you for being so open to do that. I'm going to flick down to the bottom here and see if I can find somebody. So let's have a look at Julie here, who's a psychologist that I work with. You can do it on the fly, but Julie here has actually filled in a full questionnaire. If you fill in a full questionnaire, you get a slightly more accurate result, and you can then explore the personas. So here's Julie, and this is the aggregate view of Julie. She's a psychologist that's very disciplined and sensible, down to earth, quite introverted and contained. If I talk too much in the day, she puts headphones on, not to listen to music, but to block me out. But she's not really big picture. She doesn't have huge numbers of ideas. If I click on the plus here, but what's she like underneath? If I met Julie at the weekend, if I click on the underlying persona, it's going to pull up and it's going to show us that actually she's a lot more outcome focused in her underlying dispositional sort of natural instinctive way. If we have a look at what happens when she goes to her everyday, how does she behave at work, questions that measure behavior, it will morph and we'll get a different view. She goes a bit more blue, so at work she's more contained and sensible. But what happens if we put Julie under pressure and she overextends? We've got a view of what happens to her in that scenario, and if I flick here, we're going to find she goes purple. So take a look at that. This is Julie's personality when the chips are down and she's got to get stuff done. She focuses everything on being discipline driven, get it done, stick to the plan. She tries to be a nice person at the same time, and she's more introverted, doesn't speak so much, and just get stuff done. So this dynamic is pretty fascinating. So really, I'm hoping on this call I've conveyed to you a little bit of at the beginning, the reason why this was created in terms of my background and philosophy, a little bit on the academic credentials and the numbers behind this layout and approach, and I'm hoping this app has given you a good feel for how you can practically use it, in coaching, in workshops, in interventions, and so on, to bring personality to life, to make it more than just a bunch of numbers. Now, Gopal, I'm aware that we wanted to build some time in for questions, answers, and any reflections at the end. And David, I'm wondering actually, maybe I should ask you, have you got any reflections on the analysis we've just been through? How would that describe your relationship with Gopal?
I need to unmute him. Just give me a second.
I think it's a very fair and accurate description. I think Gopal and I get on very well, and we do talk about some of the more visionary parts of the ICG business model, in particular the Global Thought Leader Program. So, tonight's a shining example of that collaboration.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, it is. And so part of the idea is valuing the things that you have in common and playing to those strengths, but also valuing the things where you're different. Yeah, is a really practical thing to do as well, which will no doubt strengthen ICG because of your differences.
Stuart, you and I spoke several times, and I think when we compared our splashes yesterday, I think we could easily understand why we spent so much time speaking about those exciting topics.
Yeah, we both got really excited about it because we're both visionaries that like to be groundbreaking and you know break into new stuff. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, you know, I'm aware that there's a lot of interesting things that you have to present and say, but in the interest of time, I think I'd like to move to the part where you can help us understand what is it that you're making available to ICG consultants through the ICG platform. I'll just get to that straight away.
Okay, no worries.
I'm kind of skipping through this part of it. Thanks.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, let me just have a look. Okay, thanks for that. Okay, so so some of the things that we have here, there's a slide deck created, so partly based on some of the slides today, and partly more that would be suitable for big events. So that's available for you to work with your clients. It also works for workshops, for key events and so on. And we do have a sort of a full range of products. So I've just showed you one of them, which is Lumina Spark, measuring who you are. But we also have products that look at your teamwork, look at your emotional intelligence, look at your leadership, and so on. And we do want to, when we bring people on as practitioners and qualify people in the instruments, we do want people to have ongoing development and application of everything we do here. So that's why point 6, we've got qualifications. So you can go through a 3-day program to get qualified in these instruments, and with webinars that we put on a regular basis to bring it to life, to share case studies, to share best practice, and so on. So there was one just a couple of weeks ago from someone who won an award with the Association for Business Psychology for implementing a leadership program, and at the heart of it was the Lumina Spark model and use of the app, which we looked at today. So if we want to flick through, how can you get involved? Well, it may be that you want to engage your clients and develop some of your clients. You could put on workshops for them. If you like what you've seen here today, I'd love to support you and blog it and share it. And of course, the quarterly GTLs are perfect forums for sharing more and getting excited about it.
Stuart, we'd love to get your submission for the GTL quarterly, so we can include that in our first release coming up around mid-July.
Okay, you've got it. I'll absolutely do that. Yeah.
Great, great.
Be very excited.
All right.
To do that. Yeah, I saw a couple of them came through which looked really great. Yeah.
Excellent. You know, it's been a fantastic presentation from you, Stuart, especially the demonstration online and so on. And I'm sure that those on the attendance have some questions for you. I already know that Marley has asked a question relating gender. So what I'm going to do is unmute Marley for a second. I'll start unmuting everyone so that they can ask.
Great, great.
Hi, it's Marley. I had a question
wondering
whether there were any, 2 questions really, any differences have you found by gender or by occupation?
Yes, great. Both great questions. So I'll start with gender. So there are some key gender differences. The interesting thing is the gender differences are not quite as large in most areas of personality as people think they'll be. So the notion of men are from Mars, women are from Venus turns out to be not backed up with the evidence. So let me tell you where there's no gender difference. There's no gender difference in terms of imagination. Men and women are equally imaginative. There's no gender difference in terms of being organised and getting stuff done. But where there are gender differences is largely around competition versus collaboration and empathy versus logic. So females tend to be, on average, slightly more empathetic and inherently more collaborative. Males, on average, are more competitive and are more comfortable being direct and blunt. Now, these tendencies are only averages across a large sample, and they're always dominated by individual differences. So to bring that to life, I'm a man, but actually I'm higher on empathy and collaboration, and my wife, who's a woman, she's higher on competition and toughness. So it's always more relevant to know the individual, obviously, than just their gender. But these gender differences are interesting because, as the Google study from a year ago showed, a small difference that has an impact on incremental decisions day in, day out can build up over 5 years to make a big difference to a culture. So if you do have many, many women in senior leadership decisions and a small number of decisions each day are made on a more collaborative and empathetic basis, even if the difference is just a few percentage points, it will ramp up and impact the culture over a number of years. So any questions on the culture before I answer the question around profession?
Well, I have a question, Stewart, and that is there a difference between how it's viewed when you implement it in, say, mature markets versus developing markets and, intermediate markets?
In terms of gender or just generally?
Oh, in terms of culture.
So, yeah, so in terms of culture, one of the key differences in terms of psychometrics is in really developed economies, the US, the UK, Australia, and so on, organizations are much more interested in developing their talent and retaining their talent, and they're much more likely to use this psychometric knowledge to help people build self-knowledge and be better leaders. Whereas when you go to less developed economies, so I was recently running an intervention in Madagascar, which is one of the poorest countries on the earth, they are more interested in who's right for the job and using it in assessment and recruitment. And as economies become more developed, they become more interested in developing their people. So that's one key difference. In terms of do traits vary across cultures, they do. And again, it's as with gender, the most important thing is the individual differences, not the culture. But nevertheless, the culture is important. So you can probably guess some of this, but people from Japan and Asia tend to be slightly more introverted on average than people from the US that tend to be slightly more extroverted. And people from the Netherlands, compared to people in the UK, tend to be more direct and blunt. People in the UK tend to be slightly more, compared to the Dutch, reserved, and so on. So there are key cultural differences. One of the other questions from Marla was, is there a difference in terms of roles? And in fact there is. So you do find, for example, I have a sample of people from whose job title is CEO. You'll find that higher on average, much higher on outcome focused and discipline and extroversion, which makes those red qualities. And you'll find people who are in, let's say, the job title of a coach, on average will have slightly higher people focused and green. So people's career choices are influenced by who they are. Equally, once you're in a career and living in a culture and behaving in a certain way, that will start to change, not your underlying dispositional traits, they're pretty constant, but your ongoing behavior every day will be shaped over a period of 5-10 years, and you will start to become, in your everyday persona, a different person if you work in an environment long enough. So that was how I would describe it in terms of role. Now, of course, it doesn't mean just because more CEOs are outcome focused and red, it doesn't mean that they necessarily perform better. It just means that they are attracted to their role. So correlating a job role with performance is a whole new interesting thing, and I showed you some of the data on that, but really you need to drill in specifically and get data on, here's a job title, the people with that job title, how do they link to the different aspects, and how does that impact their performance?
So your comment about the gender differences and leadership, which came down, which you talked about starting to change culture when you said that women tend to be more collaborative in their decision making. Is that considered to be a good thing, or is that not even a relevant question?
Well, if I was to generalize, it's considered a good thing. Now, there will be dissenting voices and people that disagree. So, for example, just to give you a disagreeing voice, Professor Hogan from the US, one of the top personality researchers, he is in favor of leaders being more extroverted and blunt and so on. So he would be a dissenting voice. But there's many, many other perspectives, probably many more, I would say, that say actually bringing more collaboration and empathy to organizations is generally a good thing. So certainly taking Google as an example, they've done studies that show how gender bias can have an impact over time, and cultural bias can have an impact. And there is lots of research that says increased diversity at work, as long as it's valued, improves performance. It is a little bit like Hooke's law in physics, that there is an elastic limit that you can go beyond. So if you have people that are utterly different culturally and so diverse that they can't value each other, then of course it doesn't work. People argue. But if you can have diversity in a team and value each other, yes, then there's lots of evidence that improves the performance of the team. And what you don't want to do is have a team of clones, which you do often see when people recruit in their own image without thinking this through. And it's easy to recruit in your own image. It's what happens by default if we don't think about it or use psychometrics intelligently. And the risk of recruiting in your own image is you get short-term performance, but over a period of time you get cultural blind spots. So as an example, I worked with a large shipping group a number of years ago, and they wondered why they weren't innovating and hadn't been innovating for a decade. And when we looked at who they'd been recruiting fast, operational, action-orientated people, and over a period of time they've driven the innovation out of the business, and they hadn't realized they'd done it, because they had too many people that were too similar at a high level. So that's the risk if you don't have diversity. It's a sort of an unconscious blind spot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stewart. I think we have time
for really great
just,
questions.
Just one more question, and then we'll have to close down the webinar.
Question from David here. Stewart, could you share with us your best practices for selling this capability as you've observed from other third parties? So, obviously you're very good at selling it, but what have you observed from others that have been successful in introducing this to their clients?
Okay, that's a great question. So the first thing to say is that there isn't a completely simple answer to this. So you're not really selling a product that you just click, plug and play. This is something that works in the context of consulting. So these psychometric approaches are an integration of great products with superb, inspired consulting. So that means it's inevitably a consultancy-based sale and blending this into the solution. So what have I observed seems to work? Well, it goes without saying you need to understand your customer's needs. And I think I highlighted earlier, if you can quickly home in on, is it an assessment need? Is it a need? Is the client interested in, getting the right people in the right roles? Yep, that takes you down one track. Or are they interested in being on the same side as the individuals and developing? That takes you down another track. So two different mindsets in the sales process. It's good to see where your client is on that. That runs fairly deep. If I home in on the assessment side, again, it's understanding the client's needs. Are they looking simply to reduce cost with a streamlined assessment process that's quicker and uses less resource? That's one benefit. Speak the language of that benefit. Or is it that they want to get the right people in the right roles so that they don't quit, they stay longer, and save recruitment cost in future? So it's about speaking the language of the benefits. If we're developing people and we're in the sales process, the key thing is to know, well, why do they want to develop people? Because there's quite different benefits. So, for example, with many professions, organizations develop people simply to encourage them to stay with the organization because they'll enjoy it, benefit from it, and they're less likely to leave. And that is a perfectly legitimate reason for developing people. Another reason could be that you want to move them into other roles, and it's part of succession planning, so you want to develop them to be the future leaders. And if that's the benefit, you need to understand the benefits of planning for the future. I guess two other benefits that typically emerge, and it's about seeing which your client's looking for. One would be a benefit around teamwork. So if we develop people and they're more interpersonally skilled, they can read other people better, they're more likely to co-create. So it's back to those 4 principles at the start of the call: self-knowledge, speed reading, build rapport, value diversity, co-create results. You could call that a team-working benefit of more cohesive teams. And the final benefit that clients often have is developing their leaders. Why do they want to develop their leaders? Because they want their staff more engaged. And really, whenever you hear staff engagement, I hear it's a leadership issue. If staff are not engaged, look at the leaders. If a leader can know who they are and develop themselves, they're more likely to be able to treat their staff as individuals, connect with them, and then the staff are much more likely to be engaged. So it's developing leaders in order to get the prize of staff engagement and discretionary energy to make the organization more profitable. So that was a bit of a long answer, David, to a short question, but I tried to cover the key drivers that bring the key benefits that this approach can bring when you combine the product with good consulting.
Great.
Don't know how that lands with you.
Well, thank you. I think it's a very comprehensive answer and exactly what our eager consulting base needs to hear. So much appreciated.
Yes.
Thanks, David, for the question, and thanks, Stewart, for a fantastic webinar. If anybody has more questions, you can always contact Stewart by getting his contact details through our website, the ICG website. And otherwise, I will thank the participants as well as Stewart once more, and I will now be shutting down the recording and stopping the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so David, Gopal, thank you for inviting me in today, and thank you for everyone being on the call and listening. I hope you found it of interest. Thank you so much.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Stuart.